And during those 40 days after his death, 1 Corinthians 15 says he appeared to over 500 men at one time. They saw him. These 500 men, they saw him and they witnessed him. And not only did they witness him alive after his death, his disciples and many of his followers were willing to die for being his followers. Why? Because they witnessed his resurrection. They saw him rise from the dead. And if we're not satisfied with the Bible as our only piece of evidence, we know from outside sources, not in the Bible, some from opponents of Christianity, that many of his disciples' followers died and never recounting their faith. They were martyrs for their faith. They never recounted their faith. And as one writer has said, men will die for a conviction, but they will never die for a concoction. The men that walked with Jesus were close to him. They watched him die and witnessed him alive after his crucifixion. And they were all under the conviction that Jesus rose from the dead. Why? Because they witnessed it. They were convinced that it was true. They were either all of these people, they were either all wickedly deceived by Jesus as the greatest con artist of all time, or Jesus really rose from the dead. And Jesus really was who he said he was. You know, there's a lot of theories trying to disprove his death and resurrection. It's truly fascinating, I think. Most are rather entertaining and pretty funny. You know, I love this type of stuff, the mystery of all of it. Because, you know, Jesus' body is nowhere to be found. He's the most famous religious figure, one of the most famous religious figures in the world, if not the most famous, where his body is nowhere to be found. It's the greatest unsolved murder mystery on the planet in the history of the world. A man that healed the sick, the blind, the deaf, a man that performed miracle after miracle, that studied and upheld the Old Testament law perfectly. He spoke and taught on love and kindness and generosity and caring for the poor and the sick. His teachings are deemed to be a standard of moral ethics around the world, even for his opponents. Even for his opponents, and even today, other religions around the world love his teachings. They tell his followers to read his teachings and study it. It's widely believed that he was a wise teacher, a loving man, possibly even a prophet. But yet, when Jesus' opponents get to the resurrection, they start to stumble. They start to stumble. But what we must understand is that these cannot be separated. It's logically inconsistent. It's logically inconsistent. But if we consider the evidence, here in the courtroom of our homes today, the only thing that makes logical sense is that Jesus was, as we've said, either the greatest con artist of all time, or he was the Savior of the world that lived, died, and truly rose from the dead.